My name is Marcus Whitfield. I'm 38 years old and I live on Cedar Ridge Drive in Lincoln, Nebraska. Before we go any further, if stories about real marriages, real betrayals, and the quiet ways ordinary people fight for the things they love mean something to you, take a second to subscribe to my channel and drop a comment below, because I read every single one and this community is built one honest story at a time. Now, let me tell you what happened. The first time my marriage ended, I watched it happen and I couldn't stop it. The second time someone tried to take a marriage from me, I got in my truck, drove 300 miles to a lake, where my wife thought she was fishing alone with her best friend, and I made sure a very wealthy man understood the difference between a husband who doesn't know and a husband who does. That's the whole story in 3 sentences. But you didn't come here for 3 sentences. So let me take you back to the beginning. All the way back. Because this story only makes sense if you understand who Marcus Whitfield was before everything that happened in September of 2024. I'm a civil engineer. I design the things people drive over and walk across without ever thinking about them, which is exactly how it should be. Because the highest compliment a structure can receive is to be forgotten. Bridges, retaining walls, drainage systems, load calculations. I have spent my entire adult life learning one central truth about the physical world, and it turned out to be the central truth about my emotional life too. Every structure has a load it was designed to carry, and every structure has a point at which it fails. The difference between the two is not luck. It's design, and it's maintenance, and it's whether anyone bothered to inspect the foundation after the first crack appeared. I know that truth because I have been through the kind of marital betrayal that restructures a man's psychology the way a 100-year flood restructures a riverbank. Permanently, and not always in ways you can see from the surface. The first time I was married, I was 26. Her name was Danielle. We'd been together since our junior year at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, married the year after graduation, and I believed, with the complete and total confidence of a 26-year-old who does not yet know what he doesn't know, that we were solid, that we were the kind of couple other people pointed to at barbecues and said, "Those two figured it out early." We lasted 3 years. Danielle left me for a man named Gary Prescott. Gary was 41. He owned a chain of car dealerships across eastern Nebraska, drove a different vehicle every week the way other men changed shirts, and carried the kind of easy financial confidence that fills a room before the man himself has finished walking into it. I want to be fair to him, even now, all these years later, because fairness matters to me. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't a villain out of a movie. He was simply richer than me, substantially, visibly, in ways that mattered to Danielle, in ways she had never fully told me they mattered, and maybe in ways she had never fully admitted to herself until the option appeared in front of her wearing a tailored jacket and holding the keys to a life I couldn't offer yet. She didn't even apologize. That was the part that left the mark. She sat across from me at the kitchen table in our little apartment on Maple Street in Lincoln, folded her hands the way people do when they've rehearsed something, and she said, "Marcus, I love you. I just need more than this, more than this, more than me, more than a 29-year-old civil engineer with a good mind, a small apartment, a used truck, and a future that simply hadn't happened yet." I signed the divorce papers in 2013. I was 29 years old, and I made a decision sitting alone in my truck outside my attorney's office on Harrison Street. Carla Mendez was her name. A sharp, kind woman who handled the whole thing with more grace than the situation deserved. Sitting there in that parking lot with the engine off and the papers on the passenger seat, I decided 3 things. That I was going to be fine, that I was going to rebuild, and that I was never, for as long as I lived, going to be the man who couldn't hold his wife because someone with more money came along. What I didn't know then, what I would not understand for more than a decade, is that what I had actually decided that afternoon was to carry the wound forward without ever properly closing it. I mistook a decision for healing. A lot of men do. We treat resolve like it's medicine, when really it's just a tourniquet, and a tourniquet left on too long does its own kind of damage. I spent my early 30s building the career, the reputation, the financial stability that I apparently believed I needed in order to feel like I was finally enough. I made senior engineer at 32. I bought my house on Cedar Ridge Drive at 33, a solid brick ranch with good bones and a back porch that faced west, so the evenings came in gold. I drove a truck I owned outright. I kept a savings account fat enough to make me feel anchored. By any external measure, Marcus Whitfield was doing very well. And then I met Sabrina. We met at a fundraising dinner for New Horizons, the domestic violence shelter here in Lincoln, in the spring of 2016. I was there because a colleague had an extra ticket and applied the kind of cheerful peer pressure that engineers are famously bad at resisting. Sabrina was there because she had been volunteering with the organization for 2 years, running pro bono therapy sessions with residents, because that is the kind of woman Sabrina Holt was and is. The first time I ever saw her, she was standing near the bar arguing, politely but immovably, with a city councilman about the shelter's funding allocation. And she was winning. She did not seem to notice or care that the councilman was 3 times her age and several rungs above her on whatever ladder he imagined mattered. I stood nearby with a drink I wasn't drinking and watched her systematically dismantle his counter-arguments with the pleasant, unhurried demeanor of a person who knows she is right and has generously decided not to make it embarrassing for anyone. I remember the exact thought that crossed my mind. That woman is going to be a lot of work and absolutely worth it. I was right on both counts. We dated for 2 years. A deliberate pace, because I told Sabrina in the very first month that I had been through a divorce, that it had cost me something structural, and that I needed to move at a speed I could trust. She didn't flinch. She didn't treat it like a red flag or a challenge or a project. She just said, "That's fine. I'm not in a hurry. I want to do this right." And she meant it, because Sabrina Holt does not say things she doesn't mean. It is one of the most disorienting and wonderful things about being married to her. We married in June of 2018, a small ceremony outdoors on the west side of Lincoln, because Sabrina had no patience for anything that required a seating chart more complicated than strictly necessary. Tobias Reed, my best friend since college, stood up as my best man. Sabrina's closest friend Renee Whitaker was her maid of honor. Remember both of those names. They matter more than anyone at that wedding could have guessed. By early 2024, we had been married almost 6 years. No children yet. That was a conversation we kept scheduling and then rescheduling, not out of avoidance exactly, more out of the honest acknowledgement that we were both deeply committed to our work, and neither of us wanted to rush a decision that could not be reversed. We had time. We were only 37 and 38. Sabrina is a licensed professional counselor and therapist, the kind who specializes in what her field calls executive behavioral health. High-functioning adults dealing with addiction, narcissistic personality patterns, anxiety, and the specific corrosive damage that extraordinary wealth and pressure can do to a human psychology over time. She built her practice over 12 years, from a modest office suite on Ridgeway Avenue into something that ran entirely on word-of-mouth referrals from a very particular network. Corporate attorneys, financial advisors, executives, the kind of people whose names you'd recognize from the business pages of the Omaha and Lincoln papers. She was excellent at her job, patient, precise, and possessed of a particular ability to hold boundaries with people who were not accustomed to being told no. That ability, as it turned out, was about to be tested more severely than either of us could have anticipated. In January of 2024, through a referral from a private wealth attorney in Omaha, Sabrina took on a new client. His name was Nathaniel Grier. Nathaniel was 53 years old, a real estate developer and private equity investor, headquartered in Omaha, with significant holdings across Nebraska, Iowa, and Colorado. His net worth, according to public reporting in the regional business journals, sat somewhere between $300 and $400 million. He had been married twice, divorced twice, and carried a reputation in Omaha financial circles as a man who was brilliant, relentless, and extraordinarily difficult to work with. He had been referred to Sabrina for 2 reasons. First, he had an alcohol dependency he was trying to manage privately, without the exposure of a high-profile treatment program or anything that might surface in the business press. And second, because he had been described by the referring attorney as having, and I quote, significant blind spots around how he affects the people around him. That was the attorney's polished way of saying that Nathaniel Grier was a narcissist, a clinical one, functioning at a very high level, but a narcissist nonetheless. A man for whom other human beings existed primarily as instruments of his own needs, and who had spent 53 years being wealthy enough that no one had ever meaningfully pushed back. Sabrina had worked with this exact profile before. She knew the territory the way I know a soil report. She set up their sessions on a bi-weekly schedule, conducted over secure video call from her office on Ridgeway Avenue. I knew she had taken on a new client. She mentioned it in passing over dinner one evening, in late January, the way she often did. No name, no details. Sabrina was meticulous, almost religious, about client confidentiality. She simply said she'd taken on someone new who was, in her words, a handful but interesting work. I didn't think anything of it. Why would I? I should tell you what our life looked like in early 2024, so you understand exactly what was at stake. Because it was a good life. A genuinely good one, in the specific, unflashy way that only becomes fully visible when you are about to lose it. We had our routines, and I loved them the way some men love sports cars. Saturday morning coffee on the porch swing, mine with 2 sugars, hers black, and in 6 years I had never once gotten that wrong. Sunday grocery runs to Baker's on the south side. Dinner at the Copper Grill on Kessler Boulevard 4, maybe 5 times a year, always for something worth celebrating, because Sabrina believed celebration should be earned, or they stop meaning anything. Weeknight evenings, where we sat in the living room and half-watched television and fully talked. The kind of conversation that doesn't have a point but holds a marriage together. Anyway, the conversational equivalent of routine maintenance, which any engineer will tell you is the least glamorous and most important work there is. We had Biscuit, our beagle mix, who slept at the foot of the bed and took her self-appointed role as household emotional barometer very seriously. And we had the quiet, established trust of 2 people who had chosen each other carefully, and then kept choosing each other daily, which, as far as I can tell, is the only way trust actually works. Not as a monument you build once, as a bridge you inspect constantly. I did not know yet that someone had decided to put that bridge under a stress load it was never designed to bear. The first sign that something was off came in March of 2024. Sabrina came home from her office one Thursday evening quieter than usual. Not upset. Sabrina did not do upset outwardly. She processed internally, behind a face that gave away nothing, which made her a superb therapist and an occasionally maddening spouse. But something had shifted in the particular quality of her silence that night. I know her silences the way a musician knows the difference between a rest and a pause. This one had weight in it. Long day? I asked. Had a session that went sideways, she said. She set her bag down, poured herself a glass of water, and stood at the kitchen sink for a long moment, looking out at the backyard where the last of the March snow was giving up in patches. I didn't press. With Sabrina's work, pressing was rarely the right move, and I had learned that the hard way early in our marriage. But later that night, when she thought I was asleep, I was still awake on my side of the bed, and I heard her exhale. Long, slow, controlled, the exhale of a woman managing something. I didn't know it then, but the thing she was managing had a name, and that name was going to put everything we had built directly in the crosshairs. By April of 2024, Sabrina had been treating Nathaniel Greer for 3 months, and somewhere in the architecture of those sessions, something had begun to shift. Nathaniel had started with what Sabrina would later describe to me as calibrated flattery. The kind that sounds, on the surface, like therapy-appropriate self-reflection, but lands just slightly wrong, like a note played a quarter tone flat. Comments about how he had never had a therapist who really understood him. References to her intelligence that lingered a beat longer than professional appreciation warranted. Observations about her voice, her manner, her presence, that had nothing whatsoever to do with the clinical work they were supposed to be doing. Taken individually, each comment could be dismissed, and that was precisely the design. A therapist who works with narcissistic patterns understands the difference between a client seeking genuine connection and a client testing the perimeter. Nathaniel was testing the perimeter, then he pushed past it. In mid-April, during what was supposed to be a session focused on his alcohol dependency triggers, Nathaniel made a comment that was, without any ambiguity whatsoever, sexual. Direct, deliberate, not a slip, a probe. Sabrina shut it down immediately in the precise clinical way she was trained to. She redirected the session. She documented the incident in her notes, in the careful language of her profession, the same day. And then she sat alone in her office after the call ended and stared at the wall, holding a decision she was not yet ready to say out loud. She didn't tell me that night, and I understand why. I do now. Back then, I didn't have the information to understand anything at all, which, as you will see, was exactly the conditions someone wanted me kept in. By May, it had happened twice more. Each time, Sabrina responded with professional boundary setting, calm and unambiguous. Each time, Nathaniel apologized with the smooth, practiced sincerity of a man who has learned over 53 years that apology is a tactic rather than a reckoning. And each time, the comment that followed the apology was slightly more forward than the last. He was escalating, slowly, incrementally, the way a structural load increases on a beam that was never rated for it. Not enough to trigger alarm at any single moment, but accumulating, steadily and by design, toward a point of failure. Sabrina knew this pattern. She had mapped it in other clients across 12 years of practice. She could see exactly where it was going. And so she made her decision. In late May of 2024, Sabrina formally terminated her therapeutic relationship with Nathaniel Greer. She did it by the book, because Sabrina does everything by the book. A written notice of termination, referrals to 2 other practitioners in the Omaha area who specialized in his profile, a final session to close the clinical relationship appropriately and ethically, professional, clean, final. She believed that would be the end of it. She was wrong, and the way she found out she was wrong would change everything that came after. The first delivery came on a Thursday morning in June of 2024. A Thursday, I remember, because I work from home on Thursdays, and I was at my desk reviewing storm drainage calculations when the delivery van pulled up in front of our house. It was a flower arrangement, not a modest one. A large, formal arrangement of white orchids and dark red roses in a cut glass vase that I could tell was expensive from 10 feet away. The way you can tell certain things are expensive without knowing anything about them, simply by the confidence with which they exist. The delivery driver handed it to me at my own front door, with the mild professionalism of a man who hands over flowers for a living, and has no particular interest in what they mean. There was a card. It said, "Sabrina, thinking of you." I stood at my front door, holding this arrangement that another man had sent to my wife at my house, and I felt something I had not felt in a very long time. Something cold and specific sitting in the back of my chest, just behind the sternum. Not jealousy, not yet. Something more like professional instinct. The civil engineer's reflex. The feeling of running your hand along a surface that is supposed to be sound and finding a hairline crack where no crack should be. I set the flowers on the kitchen counter. I did not throw them away. I did not make assumptions. I am, by nature and by training, a man who collects information before drawing conclusions. This is an extremely useful quality in engineering. In a marriage, it means that sometimes you hold things quietly when you should be asking about them out loud. Remember that sentence. It is the hinge this whole story turns on. When Sabrina came home that evening, I was in the kitchen starting dinner. I nodded toward the arrangement on the counter. "Someone named N thinks of you," I said. Neutral, fact-based. Sabrina went very still for a fraction of a second. So brief that if I hadn't known her for 8 years, I would have missed it entirely. Then she said, "A former client. I terminated his sessions last month. He's apparently not taking it well." "Former client," I said. "I'll handle it," she said. And I believed her, because Sabrina Whitfield handles things. That is simply who she is. But something in the back of my mind filed away that fraction of a second of stillness, the way you file away a hairline crack in a load-bearing beam. Not alarm, awareness. What I did not know yet, what I could not have known, was that Nathaniel Greer had done a very specific kind of homework on Marcus Whitfield. And the flowers were only the opening move. The second delivery came 2 weeks later. A gift basket. High-end, the kind assembled by a professional concierge service. Gourmet items, a bottle of champagne with a French name, and a small sealed envelope that I did not open, because it was addressed to my wife and I am not that kind of man. Even when something cold is sitting behind my sternum telling me to become one. Sabrina opened it privately. She didn't tell me what it said. I noticed. I filed it. I said nothing. The third delivery was the one that cracked something open in me. It arrived on a Saturday morning in early July. A Saturday when I was home, when Sabrina was home, when we were both fully visible inside the life we shared on Cedar Ridge Drive. That timing was not an accident. Nothing this man did was an accident. It was a jewelry box. Small, wrapped in navy paper with a silk ribbon, the kind of wrapping that costs more than most gifts. The delivery note was handwritten, not typed. Handwritten, in a script too deliberate to be casual. It said, "For everything you deserve." Nathaniel. I held that note in my hand for a long moment. Then I set it down on the counter, next to the jewelry box, and I walked out to the back porch, and I stood there in the July heat, and I breathed. Because there is a difference, a categorical difference, between a confused former client who sends flowers once, and a man who obtains your home address and arranges a handwritten jewelry delivery on a Saturday morning, when he knows the husband will be standing there to receive it. And somewhere in the space between those two things, the ghost of Danielle and Gary Prescott had begun to stir. That old wound. The one I thought I had closed in a law office parking lot 11 years earlier. The one that had never actually closed at all, only quieted. And now it was awake, and it was whispering the only sentence it knows. You weren't enough before. What makes you think you're enough now? Sabrina found me on the back porch. Marcus, she started. Tell me what's happening, I said. Still calm, deliberately calm. Because the alternative was to let 11 years of unprocessed fear do the talking. And I was smart enough, barely, to know that would not serve either of us. She sat down on the porch steps and she told me most of it, the inappropriate comments in the sessions. The termination. The fact that she had believed it was over. She did not tell me everything. I would find out later that she held back several details. Not to deceive me, never to deceive me, but because she was genuinely afraid of what the full picture might do to me, given my history, given Danielle, given what I had told her early in our relationship about what the first collapse had cost. She was protecting me, in a way that backfired completely, because half-truths, even generous ones, even loving ones, leave gaps, and gaps get filled. The imagination is a contractor that never leaves a space empty, and it always builds with the worst available material. How wealthy is this man? I asked. She looked at me steadily, very, and there it was. The thing I had been trying not to think. The thing that had lived in my chest since 2013 and never fully moved out. I stood up. I walked back inside. And I spent the next 48 hours doing something I am not proud of, but will be honest about, because this channel does not exist so that I can perform a better version of myself for strangers. I retreated into myself, not anger, not accusations. I didn't have evidence for accusations, and I have never been the kind of man who makes them without evidence. But I went quiet. Quiet in the specific way that Sabrina knew was not good. The way that meant I was carrying something I had not handed to anyone yet. She saw it, she didn't push it, and she made a decision of her own. Sabrina's closest friend in the world was a woman named Renee Whitaker. They had been friends since their undergraduate years at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. The kind of friendship that survives 15 years of moves, careers, weddings, and losses, and somehow keeps its original chemistry intact. Renee ran her own small marketing firm in Lincoln, and she possessed the kind of blunt, practical intelligence that makes a person invaluable in a crisis and slightly terrifying at a dinner party. Sabrina trusted her completely. In early July of 2024, Sabrina confided in her. Not everything all at once, but across 2 or 3 long phone calls over the course of that month, Renee got the full picture. Nathaniel Grier, the escalating comments during therapy, the termination, the gifts arriving at our home, the handwritten note, and then the part that Sabrina said quietly, on an evening call while I was still at the office. Her fear about what all of this was doing to me. He's gone quiet, Sabrina told her. You know what that means. Renee knew. What Sabrina did not know, what she would not find out until much later, at a lakeside restaurant 300 miles from home with a recording device running in her bag and a very rich man sitting across the table from her, was that Renee had decided to do something about it. But I'm getting ahead of myself. In August of 2024, Nathaniel Grier escalated beyond gifts. What we pieced together later, through Nathaniel's own admissions and through what Renee helped uncover, was that at some point after the termination, Nathaniel had commissioned what amounted to a private background investigation. Not on Sabrina, on me. He knew about Danielle. He knew about Gary Prescott. He knew about the divorce in 2013 and the specific shape of it, that my first wife had left me for a substantially wealthier man. Somewhere in a folder that a stranger had been paid to compile, my oldest wound had been located, photographed, measured, and assessed for exploitability. He had found the crack in the foundation, and he began applying pressure directly to it. The campaign was subtle and calculated, and I want you to understand exactly how it worked, because there is a lesson in it that goes far beyond my marriage. A second set of flowers arrived, this time with a note that Sabrina intercepted before I could see it. Renee later saw a photograph of that note. Its language implied an intimacy that did not exist, framed as a private joke, a shared memory, a reference to nothing that had ever actually happened. It was written not for Sabrina at all. It was written for me. It was designed so that if I saw it cold, without context, my own history would do the rest of the demolition work for him, free of charge. He was trying to make me doubt my wife. He was trying to make me see Danielle when I looked at Sabrina. He was trying to collapse a structure without ever touching it, by convincing the structure to collapse itself. And in August, in the silence of our house, in the quiet shell I had constructed around myself, he was slowly, incrementally succeeding. I did not accuse Sabrina of anything. I want to be absolutely clear about that, for the record and for my own conscience. I made no accusations, but I withdrew. I was shorter in conversation. I slept with the careful distance of a man holding a question he is afraid to ask out loud. And Sabrina, who knew exactly where that withdrawal came from, and exactly who had engineered it, was watching her marriage cool from the outside, feeling the specific helplessness of a woman who has all of the evidence and none of the format to present it without causing the very damage she was trying to prevent. She needed Nathaniel on record, not as his therapist. That relationship was over, formally and ethically terminated, which meant the clinical framework no longer bound the situation. What she needed was to confront him as a private citizen, a private individual, confronting a man who was harassing her and targeting her family. And here is a detail that matters, because my wife does not make a move without knowing the legal ground she is standing on. Nebraska is what's called a one-party consent state. Under Nebraska law, an individual may lawfully record a conversation to which they themselves are a party, without the consent or knowledge of the other participant. Sabrina had confirmed this, twice. Her plan was clean, and it was built on the one thing she understood better than anyone: Nathaniel Greer's own psychology. She would contact him. She would agree to meet him in person, framing it as a conversation about his behavior, knowing with clinical certainty that his ego would interpret the invitation as an opening, as victory, as the moment his pressure campaign finally paid off. She would lead him through the conversation. Get him talking, get him admitting. His narcissism would do the heavy lifting, because Nathaniel Greer was not a man accustomed to believing he had ever done anything wrong, and Sabrina knew, from 3 months of sessions, precisely how expansive he became when he felt he was in control of a room. She would get the confession on tape. She would bring it home. She would lay it in front of me, all of it, and she would show me the one thing that mattered most: that nothing had happened. That the man trying to dismantle our marriage was not a rival. He was a predator. And that the only thing that had been standing between his plan and its failure this entire time was Sabrina herself. The location she chose was a lakeside restaurant on the south shore of Lake McConney, out near Ogallala in western Nebraska. A place Nathaniel had mentioned during their sessions as somewhere he liked to conduct informal business when he wanted to be away from Omaha. She told him she wanted to meet somewhere neutral and private. Nathaniel, whose ego translated "meet me privately" into confirmation of his own narrative, agreed immediately. She told Renee the full plan, and she told me a cover story. She told me she was going on a quick overnight fishing trip with Renee. 2 days at Lake McConney. Some walleye, some quiet, some air. Renee had a cousin with a boat out there. The story even had supporting details, because my wife is thorough. It was, on its surface, completely believable. Renee and Sabrina had actually taken fishing weekends together twice before. There was precedent. There was nothing to question. She did not tell me the real plan, because she did not want me anywhere near Nathaniel Greer until she had what she needed. She was trying to protect me, again. And again, it did not go the way she planned. Because what Sabrina didn't know was that Renee, somewhere between hearing the plan and the morning of the trip, had picked up her phone and made a call of her own. To me. Renee called me on a Tuesday morning in mid-September of 2024. I was at my office reviewing drawings for a commercial project on the south side of Lincoln. Priya Shah, my project assistant, had set the usual coffee on my desk. Everything about the morning was ordinary, right up until it wasn't. "Marcus," Renee said when I picked up, "I need you to listen to me carefully and not make a single decision until I'm finished." I leaned back in my chair. "That's a very specific opening, Renee." "Yes," she said, "it is. Because what I'm about to tell you requires a man who can hear the whole thing before he reacts. Can you do that? Tell me, I said. And she told me everything. Not just the parts Sabrina had shared with me on the porch in July. All of it. The full escalation. The specific content of the comments Nathaniel had made in session. The background investigation he had commissioned on me personally. The deliberate engineering of those gift notes to exploit exactly what he knew about Danielle. The fact that my wife had been shielding me from the scope of it for months because she knew what even the shadow of this situation could do to a man with my history. And then the last part. She's going to that lake tomorrow, Marcus. The fishing trip isn't a fishing trip. She's meeting him. She's going to get him on record. I sat at my desk and I listened, and the listening was the hardest thing I had done in years. Because every sentence was simultaneously a revelation and a reckoning. A revelation about how far Nathaniel Grier had actually gone. And a reckoning with the fact that I had let myself go quiet instead of asking out loud. And in doing so, I had handed that man precisely the damage he had been aiming for. He hadn't cracked my foundation. I had let the crack spread by refusing to inspect it. She doesn't want you there, Renee continued. She doesn't want you anywhere near him until she has the recording. But Marcus, I've been thinking about this all week, and I think she's wrong about that one part. Why? I said. My voice was steady. I was concentrating very hard on keeping it that way. Because Sabrina is going to get him talking, and she'll probably get what she needs. But Nathaniel Grier is a man who has spent his whole life doing whatever he wants to people. Because nobody has ever looked him in the eye and shown him a consequence. A recording is evidence. Evidence starts a legal process, and legal processes with men like him take years and drain everything. But a husband who shows up, calm, informed, in complete possession of the facts, and makes it clear that the next move destroys a very public career. That ends it the same day. She let that sit. You showing up as her husband and saying what needs to be said, Renee said. That closes this. I sat with it for a long moment. She wasn't wrong. I asked Renee exactly one question. Does Sabrina know you're calling me? No, Renee said. But she will, and I believe she'll understand why. I made a decision, sitting in my office on a Tuesday morning in September of 2024. The same kind of decision I had made 11 years earlier in a parking lot on Harrison Street, except this one was different in every way that mattered. That first decision had been about surviving something. This one was about refusing to surrender something, not out of pride. Not because of the ghosts of Danielle and Gary Prescott, but because Sabrina Whitfield was my wife, and a stranger with $300 million had decided to weaponize my oldest wound against my own house. And I was finished. Permanently finished, with letting that wound sit unhealed in the dark where people could find it and use it. So here is the truth about the title of this story. Yes, I decided to surprise my wife on her fishing trip. That is exactly what I decided, sitting at that desk. Except I already knew there were no fishing rods in her trunk. I knew what was waiting at that lake, and the surprise I was bringing wasn't for her. It was for him. I called an old friend that afternoon. His name is Cole Bennett. Former college roommate, 12 years of friendship, now a private security consultant in Lincoln, with a resume he mostly doesn't talk about. I told him what I needed, a professional witness, a second set of eyes, and a clean, legal, documented record of everything that was about to be said. He asked exactly 2 questions, both logistical. Then he said, I'll drive. Wednesday morning, September 11th, 2024, we headed west on Interstate 80 toward Lake McConaty. Some things you cannot engineer in advance. You can plan the structure, calculate the load, account for every variable you can name. But the moment the work begins, the moment you are actually standing in the space, you have to trust what you know and move. I arrived at Lake McConaty at 11:40 in the morning. Cole had driven separately and was already parked near the restaurant entrance in his charcoal SUV, wearing a plain navy jacket and the unhurried expression of a man who has been in a great many rooms where things were about to happen. He had a small body camera clipped to his lapel. Discreet, professional, legal. The place Sabrina had chosen was a lakeside restaurant called the Heron's Rest, a well-regarded spot on the South Shore. A wide outdoor deck built out over the water, excellent sight lines, and just enough ambient noise from the lake and the lunch crowd that a conversation could feel private without actually being private. I had looked the place up the night before, studied the layout the way I study a site plan. Nathaniel apparently had good taste in venues. I'll grant him that single thing. I sat in my truck for a few minutes before going in. The lake was doing what Lake McConaughey does in September, stretching out blue gold under a high plain sky. The water glittering, the shoreline grasses just beginning to turn at the tips. Locals call it Big Mac, and standing at its edge you understand why the nickname carries affection. It was a beautiful place to do an ugly thing, which seemed about right for a man like Nathaniel Grier. Cole walked over to my window. "She's inside," he said. "Table on the outdoor deck, her bag's on the table. If the device is in there, it's running. She doesn't know we're here." "Good," I said. "Want to walk through the approach?" "No," I said. "I know what I need to say." Cole nodded once, the nod of a man who respects a clean plan. I got out of the truck. "I want to tell you exactly what I felt walking across that parking lot, because I think it matters. And because I think some of you watching have stood at the edge of a moment like this one, or will someday." I did not feel rage. Rage is for men who have run out of other options, and I had not run out of options. I felt something closer to clarity, the specific clarity that arrives when every variable has been accounted for, when the design is correct, and all that remains is execution. I felt like a civil engineer walking onto a site he has already reviewed 100 times on paper. I walked through the restaurant. The hostess started to speak, and I smiled and said, "I'm joining someone on the deck," and kept moving, through the dining room, out through the sliding glass doors, into the September light. And I saw them. Sabrina was seated across from Nathaniel Grier at a table near the railing, the lake spread out blue behind her, the sky enormous overhead. She was leaning slightly forward the way she does when she is fully focused, elbows on the table, hands folded. Her open bag beside her, its small witness running silently inside. She was professionally composed, but I could read in the set of her shoulders the specific tension of a woman doing something that costs her. Nathaniel sat across from her. I had looked him up before I drove out, of course. I'm a thorough man. But seeing him in person was a different order of information. He was large, silver-haired, broad through the chest, dressed in the way men are when they have worn expensive things for so long that the expense stops looking deliberate. A watch that probably cost more than my truck. He was talking, and he was leaning in, and the quality of his posture, the practiced ease of a man accustomed to having his full attention received as a gift, told me everything I needed to know about what my wife had been quietly navigating since January. Here was a man who had never been told no by anything that money couldn't eventually persuade. Sabrina saw me first. Her eyes found me across the deck and she went still, so fast and so complete that Nathaniel, mid-sentence, noticed and turned. I walked to the table. I pulled out the chair beside Sabrina, not across from Nathaniel, beside my wife, and I sat down unhurried and folded my hands on the table. Cole had come onto the deck behind me and taken a quiet position near the railing, 8 feet away, not threatening. Present, Nathaniel looked at me, then at Sabrina, then back at me. "You must be the husband," he said. His voice was smooth, controlled, the voice of a man recalibrating in real time. "Marcus Whitfield," I said, "and you're Nathaniel Grier. This is a private meeting." "It was," I said. "Now it's a different kind of meeting." I did not raise my voice. I did not lean forward or deploy any of the body language of dominance that insecure men reach for when they want to look powerful. I sat still, because stillness, when it belongs to a man who is not afraid, is the most effective thing in any room. Nathaniel looked at Sabrina. "You told him." "She didn't have to," I said. "You want to understand how I know what I know, Nathaniel? I'll tell you, because I think it's important that you go into this next conversation with full information. That's a courtesy. Notice that I'm extending you one. It's the last one you'll get." He closed his mouth. "You've been sending gifts to my home," I said. "You've been writing notes engineered to look like something they are not. Because you learned my history, and you calculated that you could use it to make me doubt my wife. You commissioned a background investigation on me. You found my first marriage. You found the shape of it, and you made a bet. Apply enough pressure to the right joint, and the foundation cracks, and the marriage comes down on its own, and you never even have to get your hands dirty. That was your plan." Nathaniel said nothing. His jaw had tightened, but his eyes were still moving, still calculating, still searching for the angle. Men like him always believe there is one more angle. "The flaw in your plan," I continued, "is that you misread the load-bearing capacity. You believed you were dealing with a man who broke once and never properly healed. What you were actually dealing with is a man who broke once, rebuilt, and has spent every single day since making absolutely certain that nothing breaks the same way twice. You did homework, Nathaniel. You just did it badly. You should ask for a refund. I paused, let it breathe. Now, I said, I'm going to lay out some facts, and I need you to hear all of them before you decide what you do next. Nathaniel leaned back in his chair. Very slightly, an involuntary retreat. He probably didn't know he'd done it, I noticed. What you did to my wife in those sessions, the comments, the escalation, all of it is documented. She kept contemporaneous clinical notes, dated and detailed. She is no longer your therapist. The professional relationship was formally terminated months ago, and the conduct we're discussing is yours, not hers, which means that documentation can be presented in a civil proceeding. Everything you thought was contained inside a confidential room is legally reachable in a harassment claim. I let him absorb that. The gifts you sent to my home, with notes deliberately framed to imply an intimacy that does not exist, those are documented too. Photographs, delivery records, vendor receipts with your name on the accounts. They establish a pattern of harassment following the termination of a professional relationship. That pattern, combined with the session documentation, is the foundation of a lawsuit that I will file in Lancaster County, Nebraska, and I will personally make certain it is covered by every business publication in this state before the first hearing date. You've spent a career keeping your name out of certain kinds of print. I'm offering you a chance to keep that streak alive. Something shifted in his expression. The easy confidence was still there. Men like Nathaniel don't lose it entirely. It's been load-bearing for too long. But underneath it, something had recalculated. And the background investigation you commissioned on me personally, I added, conducted specifically to identify and exploit psychological vulnerabilities for the purpose of destabilizing my marriage. I've already sat down with an attorney about that one. We'll let her explain to your attorneys what that creates. I suspect the conversation will be brief and expensive. Sabrina had not said a single word. She sat beside me, and I could feel the quality of her stillness. Not the stillness of a woman who was frozen. The stillness of a woman watching something unfold that she had not expected and did not yet know how to hold. I would understand all of it later, but right then I had one more thing to say. Nathaniel, I said. I used his first name deliberately, evenly, the way you use a man's name when you want him to understand that you see him with total clarity. I know what you are. I've been briefed thoroughly on how you present, and on what you do when you don't get what you want. I'm not angry at you. I don't have the energy for anger at men like you. But I need you to hear this as plainly as I can say it. I leaned forward. Just slightly. Just enough to close the distance. My wife is not available to you. My marriage is not a structure you get to dismantle. And if you send one more item to my home, make one more attempt at contact with Sabrina, or use any person as a proxy to reach either of us, I will spend whatever it takes, for as long as it takes, to make sure that every person in your professional and personal life knows exactly what you are. Not because I'm vindictive, because you will have made it necessary. Engineers don't do drama, Nathaniel. We do documentation. The deck was quiet. The lake moved behind Sabrina's shoulder. A boat crossed the middle distance, slow and far away, towing a long white wake. Nathaniel looked at me for a long moment. The calculation was still running behind his eyes. With men like him, it never fully stops. But I watched something change, not remorse. Nathaniel Greer did not do remorse. Recognition. The specific recognition of a man who has identified an obstacle he cannot move, cannot buy, and cannot wait out, and has decided, for purely practical reasons, to redirect. He straightened in his chair. He picked up the glass of water in front of him and took one slow sip, buying himself the last 2 seconds of control the situation would ever offer him. Then he said, I think we've all said what we came here to say. He stood. He buttoned his jacket, that single composed gesture of a man who refuses to be seen leaving in disarray. He looked briefly at Sabrina, then at me, and he walked off the deck without another word. Cole watched him go, then looked over at me and gave one small nod. Everything captured. Clean, clear, complete. And then it was just me and Sabrina, at a table on a deck above Lake McConney, on a Wednesday morning in September, with the high plains sky doing the enormous, wide-open thing it does out there in early fall, and the sound of water underneath everything. Sabrina was looking at me. How, she said. Just that. One word, the way people speak when they have 100 questions and only enough air for one. Renée, I said. She closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, they were full, not of tears exactly, of something that lives right at the edge of tears, in people who work very hard at composure. I told her not to. I know, I said. She made the call she thought was right. And honestly, Sabrina, she was right. Sabrina exhaled, long, slow, the particular exhale I recognized from that Thursday night in March. Except this time it was the release of something that had been held far too long. Marcus, she said, I was so scared. Not of him, I could handle him. I was scared of what this was doing to you. After Danielle, after everything, I didn't know how to bring this to you, without watching it reopen something that took you years to close. I know, I said. I know all of it. Renée told me everything, and here's what I need you to hear. Are you listening? She nodded. I am not the man I was in 2013. I was that man then, and he's not in this story anymore. I know exactly who you are, and what you were doing out here today, before I ever walked onto this deck, was protecting our marriage. That's what this was. You were fighting for us. Alone, which was the only mistake in it. She held my hands tightly. I should have come to you sooner, she said quietly. I should have trusted you with the full picture. I was so focused on protecting you from the fear that I didn't see I was feeding it by going silent. And I went quiet when I should have asked out loud, I said. We both did some version of the wrong thing with the right intention. That's not a scandal, Sabrina. That's just marriage. That's two people who love each other making imperfect decisions under pressure. The only unforgivable version is the one where we don't learn from it. She laughed a little, one of those laughs that lives right next door to crying and is sometimes both at once. A fishing trip, she said. I told you I was going fishing. You did, I said, and for the record, you caught something. Biggest catch this lake has seen all year. $300 million, hook, line, and recorded. She laughed for real that time. We sat on that deck for another hour before starting the long drive back east to Lincoln. We ordered coffee, hers black, mine with 2 sugars, and we talked. Really talked. The way we hadn't fully talked in weeks. She told me everything. The sessions. Nathaniel's specific comments. The deliberate cruelty of the background investigation. The notes designed for my eyes. I listened to all of it, and every time I felt the old fear try to stand up in my chest. The Danielle ghost, the Gary Prescott ghost. I named it silently and set it back down. That's the old wound. This is not that situation. This is my wife, who fought for our marriage at a lake in western Nebraska, while I was still in the dark. That is a different thing entirely, and it mattered. Naming things matters. Ask any therapist. Better yet, marry one. As for Nathaniel Grier, he went quiet. Completely. The gift stopped that same day. No phone calls, no proxy contacts, no further communication of any kind ever. Whether it was Cole's recording, the credible threat of civil litigation with press coverage attached, or simply the cold arithmetic of a man who had encountered something that would not yield, I don't know, and I have decided that I don't particularly care. He chose to redirect. Good. Predators are at bottom opportunists, and opportunists leave when the cost curve inverts. I didn't need his remorse. I needed his absence. I got it. Renée told Sabrina about the phone call that same evening, after we got back to Lincoln. Sabrina's first response, I'm told, was a long silence. Her second was, I should be furious with you. Her third was, I'm so glad you did it. And Renée, who is constitutionally incapable of false humility, said, I know. I called Tobias that night. Grand Island, 90 miles west, second ring, as always, because Tobias Reed has answered on the second ring for 20 years. How'd it go? He asked. Good, I said. It went good. You sound different, he said. I feel different, I said. And I did. Not because I had confronted a wealthy man and watched him back down. That, honestly, was just a problem solved, no different in kind from a failed culvert or a bad soil report. I felt different because of what had happened on the drive home. The full conversation, the honest inventory of what we had both done under pressure and why. And the decision, mutual, deliberate, made somewhere around mile marker 177 on Interstate 80. Not to allow a man who had never earned a single square inch of our marriage to hold any real estate in it, ever again. Here is the thing about Nathaniel Grier that I keep returning to, months later, and it is the reason I wanted to tell this story out loud. He was a man who had spent his entire life using money, information, and calculated pressure to extract what he wanted from other human beings. And when he decided he wanted my wife, he did not attack her. because he had already learned in those sessions that she would not yield. So he studied the structure around her instead, and he identified what he believed was the weakest joint in it. My history, my wound, my specific documented vulnerability, and he applied force to that joint with real precision. What he had not accounted for, what men like him can never account for, is the difference between a wound that hasn't healed and a wound that has. They look almost identical from the outside. The scar tissue is there either way, but one of them yields under pressure. And the other, if the healing was done honestly, is actually stronger than the original material. That's not poetry, that's basic materials science. Bone, welded steel, scar tissue, trust. Properly repaired, the mended place is often the last place to fail. Nathaniel Grier bet 3 months of effort and a private investigator's fee on the assumption that my wound was still open. He should have done more homework. But I want to be honest with you about something. Because this channel is not a place where I get to come off better than I deserve. For about 6 weeks in the summer of 2024, his bet was working. Not because his plan was brilliant, because I cooperated with it. Every day that I chose silence over a question, every night that I lay on my side of the bed cataloging fears instead of speaking them, I was doing his demolition for him. The most dangerous force in my marriage that summer was not a stranger's money. It was my own unspoken fear compounding quietly, the way interest does, the way rust does. And that, if you take nothing else from this story, is the lesson I'd ask you to carry out of it. Silence is not neutrality. In a marriage, silence is a structural decision. When something frightens you, when a delivery shows up at your door, when your spouse goes quiet in a way that has weight in it, the withheld question does not protect anyone. It just leaves a gap, and gaps get filled by imagination. And imagination is the worst contractor on earth. It builds fast, it builds ugly, and it always uses the cheapest, darkest material it can find in your history. The strongest thing I did in this entire story was not walking onto that deck. Any man can walk onto a deck. Adrenaline is free. The strongest thing anyone did in this story was Sabrina sitting down across from a predator with a recorder in her bag, alone, to protect a husband who was, at that very moment, quietly doubting her. And the second strongest thing was Renee picking up a phone and risking a 15-year friendship because she believed the truth needed one more set of hands than the plan allowed. Think about what actually defeated Nathaniel Grier. It wasn't a punch. Nobody in this story ever raised a voice. He was defeated by documentation, by a therapist's discipline notes, by one-party consent law, by a body camera, by a marriage that turned out to be maintained rather than merely built, and by 3 people who each, in their own imperfect way, refused to let a lie do its work in the dark. Wealth is powerful, but it has one weakness it can never engineer around. It only works on people who can be bought, frightened, or divided. Take those 3 levers away, and a rich predator is just a man in an expensive watch, buttoning his jacket, walking off a deck. There is a version of this story where I never learned any of this, where Renee stays silent, where Sabrina gets her recording and brings it home, where I listen to it and everything is technically resolved. And I think, in that version, we survive. But there is another version, darker and closer than I like to admit, where Renee stays silent and the recording fails, or Nathaniel simply waits, and my silence and Sabrina's protection keep compounding. Until one day we're 2 polite strangers doing routines in a house on Cedar Ridge Drive. Marriages rarely collapse from a single blow. They fail the way bridges fail, from small deferred inspections, from cracks everyone noticed and no one named, from load nobody talked about. If you are carrying a question about someone you love, ask it out loud. Ask it clumsy, ask it scared. Just ask it in the light, where the 2 of you can look at it together, because everything is smaller in the light. And one more thing, for anyone watching who works in a profession like my wife's, or knows someone who does. What Nathaniel did to Sabrina in those sessions has a name. It's harassment, and the fact that it wears a tailored jacket and speaks in a calm voice does not change the name. Boundaries are not rudeness. Documentation is not paranoia. And ending a professional relationship with someone who repeatedly violates the terms of it is not failure. It is the job, done correctly. My wife did everything right at every stage, and the only revision she made afterward was to build an even better system, because that is who she is. She doesn't survive things, she systematizes them. By October of 2024, life on Cedar Ridge Drive had returned to its rhythms. Saturday morning coffee on the porch swing, Sabrina's black, mine with 2 sugars, a record I intend to carry to the grave. Sunday runs to Baker's. Biscuit at the foot of the bed, monitoring the household's emotional barometric pressure with total dedication. Date nights at the Copper Grill, where the ribeye remains excellent, and they still know us by name. There were new things, too. We started seeing a marriage counselor, not because we were in crisis. Because 2 people who nearly let silence and assumption cost them everything owed themselves the work. Dr. Rachel Simmons on Oakwood Avenue in Lincoln. Practical, direct, gifted at naming things without drama. We go twice a month, and it is reliably the most useful 2 hours in my week, which is a strange thing for an engineer to say about sitting on a couch and talking, and I say it anyway. We had the children conversation again, properly this time, without the shelf we used to put it back on. We made a decision about it that I will keep between us, because not every room in a marriage needs to be open to visitors, even friendly ones, even you. Sabrina updated her client intake process. Clearer language around behavioral expectations in the therapeutic relationship. A defined review point for boundary compliance. A faster escalation protocol for misconduct. She talked to her professional liability insurer. She talked to the state licensure office about reporting pathways for client behavioral incidents. She built a better system, because of course she did. As for Marcus Whitfield, I repainted the guest room. I run 3 mornings a week on the Prairie Creek Trail. I smoke ribs on Saturday afternoons, because I'm genuinely good at it, and because a house should smell like something worth coming home to. And I keep the porch swing in good condition. I refinished it last spring. Dark walnut stain, 2 coats, sanded between. Sabrina says it looks better than it ever has. I think she's right. Some structures, when you maintain them honestly, don't just hold. They improve. If this story meant something to you, if you've ever carried a question in silence when you should have asked it in the light, do me a favor. Hit that like button, subscribe to my channel, and tell me in the comments about a time the truth turned out to be better than the fear. I read every comment, and stories like this one exist, because this community keeps showing up for them. Thank you for listening all the way to the end. This story was written and told by a human being, drawn from lived experience and human reflection, shaped and narrated with human hands and a human heart. Names, locations, and identifying details have been changed to protect the privacy of everyone involved.